lot of you will recognize Locomotive Audio as a company that makes some really good kind of boutique quality tube preamps and compressors. This is a pretty unique box. This is called the Copperline. And essentially what it is it's an external phantom power supply with a bunch of tricks up its sleeve. So if you saw my review I did a while back of like the coil audio preamps, you probably noticed that one of the quirks with those is that they didn't offer phantom power. So you needed a way to power condenser mics if you were going to use those preamps. I know a lot of other people might have some weird, quirky vintage preamps, in which case you'll see this is probably a really good solution to sit in front of that. So in terms of the chain, this will sit, your microphone will plug into the copper line. The copper line will power your microphone. Then the output of the copper line is going to go into your preamp. Now, what I think the coolest thing about the copper line is this really unique thing where you can actually control the phantom power voltage. Phantom power is standard at 48 volts, but it does have a bit of a deviation in terms of what it can take. So I think one of the coolest things you can do with this is you can actually take it up from 48 volts up to 52. And that'll give you just a little bit of a gain bump, might give you a little bit more headroom, but you'll also notice results are going to vary from mic to mic. Every mic that I tried reacted differently with this. So I can't really tell you what your specific mic collection is going to do with this, but I can show you what some of my mics did with it. So you can take voltage up to 52 volts max. Can also take it all the way down to like 0 volts. And some of my mics actually kept operating at around 2 volts. Now, obviously, when you drop phantom power that much, you're going to get a pretty significant gain drop. Some of the consequences of that are things like a higher noise level when you start dropping it that high and compensate after the fact. You're also going to get various changes in your total harmonic distortion and even some kind of frequency response differences as well. So it's one of those things that you'll have to experiment, but I'm going to show you a lot of audio examples so you can get an idea of what it does with a few of my mics. Now, if you have a vintage style preamp that might be a little bit picky and sensitive in terms of feeding it phantom power, this does kind of do a slow ramp when you turn it on, so it doesn't immediately shoot a crap load of power into your preamp, which with some vintage transformers, I understand that can actually damage them over time. It's a slow ramp up, so it's going to be really good for using with your vintage gear. There's also a couple of other cool features like an attenuator. You also have a high-pass filter. You've got a mute button if you just want to do some troubleshooting. You've also got a clean phase reverse, and you've also got a vintage knob that changes the impedance. And that can be important depending on what kind of gear you're feeding into after the fact. So if you've got some vintage gear, aside from the cool fact that you can vary the voltage of the phantom power, this can actually be a really good problem solver as well. So I think the first thing I want to do is I just want to start out with one of the mics that I kind of thought would make the biggest difference when you start futzing with the phantom power. I've got the new Chandler TG Type L microphone. This is their smaller, cheaper phantom power version of the TG mic. I know with the original, more expensive TG mic, one of the big features of that was that even though it was a solid state mic, had its own power supply because Chandler was feeding a lot more voltage to the capsule and the circuitry. So I kind of figured that the TG mic would be a good mic to start with because it's probably going to be sensitive to voltage changes because I think the circuit was probably designed for more power initially. So let's take a look at that one and see how it reacts with the phantom power changes on the copper line. So I found out that I could tell a pretty good difference when I racked up the voltage up to 54 volts on the TG mic. I think again that circuit kind of likes a little bit more power, so that was expected. It was also expected that it really wasn't happy when you started dropping the voltage. You'll notice that as soon as we dropped like I don't know 5 or 10 volts, the mic started to just crap out completely. So that was a little expected. Like I said, you'll see that it varies from mic to mic in terms of how they react to a drop or a gain in the voltage. So next thing I'll take a look at is the Vanguard V4 microphone. This is a transformerless circuit, and I think you'll notice that this one wasn't as picky. It could take a much larger voltage drop, and it didn't seem to really phase it aside from, a level drop. So not much of a sonic change to me really with the V4, but I think it's important to throw in there so you can see that many mics react very differently to the voltage changes. The next mic we'll take a look at is the Soyuz Bomblet, and you'll notice moving forward in the video that I use this mic on a lot of examples because I found that it was probably the most interesting sounding mic when you started messing with the voltage. Now, the Bomblet, you'll see, it's a trooper. It operated all the way. It was still passing signal when we dropped the voltage down to like 2 volts. There is a little bit of a change when you rack it up as well, but this is a really good mic to play around and let you hear sonic differences because it does react the most audibly out of all the microphones I had in my collection to the phantom power changes. So let's take a listen to that and sweep through the voltage. Wanted to throw some small cap mics into this to see if that makes any bit of a difference. I noticed with the Vanguard V4 that, maybe because it's transformerless circuits might not be as picky and might not give you as audible a change when you start messing with the voltage. I'm not sure if that's true yet. This is very new to me. Like most of you probably never messed with something like this. It's really unique. So we'll listen to the new Soyuz 011 small caps, and we'll sweep the voltage and see what it does with those. I do have stereo pairs of a few condenser mics, so we've kind of swept through the voltage to hear changes in real time. Now what I want to do is I want to take one mic and feed it straight into the API console and use the 48 volt phantom power off the console. And then the other mic next to it is going to go into the copper line, and we're going to start out with feeding it more voltage, and that one's going to be at 52. So we're going to have one mic that's operating at the normal 48 and one mic that's operating at 52, so that we can go back and forth with them side by side and do a direct comparison. Eric from Locomotive Audio also mentioned that for some mic circuits, it can take a minute or two for everything to settle when you start messing with the voltage. So I kind of set the voltage and then let it sit for a couple of minutes and then did the, shoot out so that could have a really accurate, kind of more scientific approach and hear them side by side at different voltages. So let's listen to the Bomblet, which is a transformer circuit, and then the 011s, which are a small cap transformerless circuit, and we'll hear them at high voltage compared to normal 48 volt. Now we're going to do the exact same thing, but this time I'm going to drop the voltage. So one of the mics is going to be getting 48 volts from the API console. The other one's going to be getting 14 volts from the Copperline. So we've dropped things significantly and level matched. So right now we've lost about 12 dB by turning the phantom power down so much to 14 volts. Now it's switched to the other one at 48. So that's the noise floor at 48 volts. Switch back to 14 volts. And there's the noise floor at 14 volts. Alright, we've taken the 011 FET down to 14 volts. Here's the noise floor of the mic running at 14 volts. Now we've switched over to 48 volt phantom power like normal. Here's the noise floor. And now let's switch back over to the 14 volt noise floor. One of the interesting things that we can throw into the equation at this point is introducing things like a Cloudlifter. This is a phantom-powered preamp that goes between your microphone and your preamp, and you feed phantom power to this. That's what's powering it. So I'm going to use a tube microphone, the Vanguard V13, and then that's going to feed into the Cloudlifter. The Copperline is going to feed phantom power to this, and then we'll go into the API preamp, and we will vary the voltage going to the Cloudlifter and see what happens. But not expecting much to happen because this is a pretty clean circuit. There's not much going on. So at the most, I'm expecting, gain changes, but we'll see. was boring. There's like no change, maybe a level change. Interesting. Now the Cloudlifter is a very clean design. It's just made to give you very clean gain and an impedance boost when it's interacting with the mic. I also want to try the Soyuz Launcher. This is the deluxe version, so you actually have the option to put it into saturate mode where you don't have to power it. It's just a passive thing that gives you color. I am putting this in launcher mode. So this is a normal launcher. It needs 48 volt phantom power. It's going to give us a boost, which I'm going to compensate for with the attenuator, because if we're feeding a tube microphone into this, it's going to spit out a pretty high level, higher than like a dynamic mic. So we'll listen to this and vary the voltage on the launcher, and I am expecting some gloriously destructive sounding things to happen. We'll see. Well, that's fun. I mean, who doesn't like a little bit of distortion? Honestly, out of all the things I was going to try with this, plugging the launcher into the copper line and playing with the voltage was probably what I was most excited about. So at this point, let's try some crazy fun things. I think the mic that I noticed the most change with sonically when I turned up the voltage was the Type L, the Chandler Type L mic. So what I want to do now is I'm going to plug the Type L into channel 1 on the copper line, and I'm going to feed 52 volts to the mic. Then we're going to plug that into the Soyuz launcher and plug that into channel 2 because it needs to be powered as well. We're also going to rack the voltage up to 52 volts. So at this point we have the Type L at 52 volts feeding into the launcher at 52 volts and going into the API preamp. So let's just take a listen to that real quick. So again, that was fun. I know that mic pretty well, so I'm able to pick up that, there's some pretty significant differences than what I'm used to on that Type L. Unfortunately, I only have one of those. So, I mean, I can't really give you an accurate frame of reference right next to it of what normally it sounds like at 48 versus that crazy mess. But I do have two of the Soyuz bomblets, so I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to feed the bomblet into channel 1 and rack the voltage up on the mic to 52 volts. We're going to feed that into the launcher on channel 2, rack that up to 52 volts, and go into the API console. Then I'm going to have my other bomblet sitting right next to it. That's just going to go straight into the API at 48 volts like normal. So you can kind of get a frame of reference to a little bit of that crazy equation of racking up the voltage on the mic and the launcher. I know you're all sick of hearing that same guitar lick over and over again. It's like freaking acoustic Groundhog Day. So let's move to drums, which I think is probably going to be one of the more practical approaches of using this effectively. Um, I know it can get annoying hearing the same guitar thing repetitively over and over again, but the point of that is to actually make it repetitive so you have the same frame of reference from thing to thing. I mean, it's not really an acoustic guitar song demo. This is a sonic demo of what the voltage is doing to the mic. So sorry if that annoyed you, but again, trying to be consistent so you're listening to the same thing over and over again. But I'm sick of that guitar. I know you are. Let's move to drums. Probably know the routine right now. I'm going to start with the bomblet, and we're just going to sweep the voltage on the bomblet with some drums. So, got something that's a lot more full frequency, especially in the high areas with the cymbal, and we've got more dynamic. So, let's see what happens. Yeah, I'm not really a drummer. You'd think I'd take drum lessons by now, right? Since I end up playing drums on videos so much. Someone want to give me drum lessons? Hit me up. Still working at 2 volts. So we swept through the voltage range on the Bomblet. Now I want to do some more direct, better comparisons. I'm going to put my other Bomblet right next to it, feed that one right to the API with phantom power from the API at 48 volts. The other Bomblet I'm going to send into the Copperline, and we're going to rack that up to 52 volts. So we're going to hear high voltage from the Copperline versus normal voltage from the API. All right, same thing, but this time I'm going to drop the voltage significantly. I mean, the Bomblet's been a trooper. It's still spitting out level all the way down to 2 volts, so I'm not going to go that low, but I'm going to take it down to 6 volts, which is super low, and then I'll level match it with the other mic that's going right to the API at the normal 48 volts. All right, I saved the best thing for last. This was the one thing that I was the most excited to try. I'm going to do the same thing that I did with the acoustic guitar. I'm going to throw the Soyuz Launcher into the equation, and we're just going to do a sweep on the voltage with the launcher on drums, because this is going to be a pretty major difference. And this is probably something that I'm going to end up using a lot. You know, a lot of people like using that kind of crotch mic on drums. It's right above the kick, looking at everything. A lot of people love to distort that. Some people like to distort their room mics a little bit. I think you kind of get a double whammy here, because when you start dropping the voltage and starving the launcher, You get a little bit of a roll off on the high end, which is always a welcome thing for me on drum rooms or something weird. And you're also getting a little, a lot of THD in some instances. So let's sweep the voltage on the launcher with the drums and see what happens. Tune that snare. Yeah, sitting around 30 volts to 26 volts sounds pretty good for like a character mic. If you put a crotch mic here or something and wanted to just distort it slightly. Let's go further down. Seems like the frequency response starts to get a little disproportionate there. We're kind of clipping the low end a little bit more than the high end. I'm hearing it on the kick a lot more than the snare. Let's go crazy. I'd say to be subtle about it, the sweet spot was around 30 volts for the launcher. come back to life when you feed it a little bit more voltage. That's what I'm hearing at least. Cool. I think that's pretty much everything I can think of to do with this at this point. Again, the voltage thing is really cool and unique, so I wanted to spend most of the time focusing on that. But I mean, I didn't even get into like messing around with the vintage load option, which again, on pretty much every mic, it's going to give you a little bit of a sonic difference when you flip that load. But it's even more important if you've got some vintage gear in your signal chain and you need some sort of device to help you interact more correctly with the next thing in your chain. Again, you've got the attenuation option, you've got a high pass filter. There's a ton of stuff you can do with this, even just discounting and not paying attention to the variable phantom power option. So this is definitely a really cool box. I'm looking forward to kind of putting this into the workflow with things like the coil audio preamps that, don't have phantom power, and just, being able to do some really cool things on drums, like plugging the launcher in there and varying the voltage and getting some distortion in cool new ways. So definitely check one of these out. I think everyone would find at least 2 channels of this useful, especially if you're going to patch it in and out at different points. So that is the Locomotive Audio Copperline.